Montana Territory, July 1886. The stagecoach came screaming down the canyon trail, its rear axle already burning, smoke trailing like a black ribbon through the wind. Lightning Ridge was still 3 miles off, and the horses were panicking, hooves tearing up rock and dust. Leander Rowe saw it all from the ridge above. He was on his buckskin mare, saddle creaking, rifle strapped to his back. He had been scouting for game when the smoke caught his eye. As the coach barreled around a bend below him, he saw her half hanging from the open door, white dress torn, veil tangled around her arm. Without thinking, Leander kicked his horse hard and charged down the slope. The coach hit a rock and tilted. Sparks flew from the undercarriage. The fire was catching fast now, licking up the wooden sides. Leander galloped alongside it, leaned low from his saddle, and shouted, "Grab my arm." The woman looked up, dazed, her face streaked with soot. She reached out just as the fire burst through the side panel behind her. Leander caught her wrist and yanked her hard. The force nearly pulled him off his horse, but she tumbled into his arms, and he gripped her tight against him as the stagecoach veered, toppled, and burst into flame behind them. They rode until the smell of smoke faded. Leander finally slowed his horse near a creek, dismounted, and gently helped her down. She stood barefoot in the grass, dress scorched at the hem, bouquet long gone. She looked up at him, her voice hoarse. "My name's Josie Hale." Leander nodded, his chest still heaving. "Leander Rowe." "You all right?" She nodded slowly, then sat down hard on a flat rock. "I was on my way to get married, never even met the man. My father arranged it, said it was the only way." Leander crouched beside her. "You got hurt." She shook her head. "Not bad, just shaken." He stepped back, gave her space. She was young, maybe 22, freckles dusting her nose, hair the color of wheat left too long in the sun. She looked like she had never seen fire up close before, not like he had. "I can get you to town," he said. "Lightning Ridge is not far." Josie looked at him, her eyes raw. "You live there. I live outside it, alone." "Why?" Leander hesitated, then he sat down beside her, arms resting on his knees. "Wife died 5 years ago, took our baby with her. I stayed out on the land after that." Josie looked away. "I have never been in love, never even kissed a man, and yet I was supposed to marry one today." "I reckon that fire saved you from something worse," Leander said quietly. She turned her head toward him. "And you? Have you been alone all this time?" He nodded. "I thought that was what I wanted, until I saw you hanging out that door." She blinked fast. Her hand drifted toward his, rested near it, not touching, just close. They made camp by the creek that night. He gave her his blanket and kept watch. She slept fitfully, but each time she woke, he was still there, sitting by the dying fire, the rifle across his lap. By morning she was quiet, thoughtful. She let him braid her hair to keep it off her face, and when he did, she leaned into his hands like she had needed that touch for years. "I do not want to go back," she said as they saddled up. He looked at her. "Back where?" "To my father, to that life. I would rather stay with someone I trust." Leander's hands froze on the saddle horn. "You trust me?" he asked. Josie looked at him, steady. "You pulled me from a burning coach. You stayed up all night to keep me safe. You gave me your only blanket. I trust you more than I ever trusted my own kin." Leander cleared his throat. "You barely know me. I am not asking for promises," she said. "Just a little more time." He nodded. "You can stay at my place. There is space. And quiet." They rode side by side back toward his land. Her fingers brushed his once, and this time they did not move away. Leander's cabin sat in a wide meadow, tucked between the trees. The barn leaned slightly west from last winter's storms, but the fences were strong and the smokehouse smelled of hickory. He helped Josie down and showed her inside. The cabin was small, 1 bed, 1 table, 1 stove. He cleared a space near the hearth for her to sleep. She looked around slowly. "It feels safe." "It is." That night they ate potatoes and salted meat by lantern light. She let her hand rest on the table a moment longer than needed. He noticed but said nothing. She looked at him, voice quiet. "I do not want to sleep on the floor." Leander's jaw tightened. "There is only 1 bed." "I know, I want to be near someone, just to feel not so alone." He nodded. "All right, just sleep." She slipped under the quilt, turned her back to him. He lay down carefully beside her, facing the ceiling. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then she whispered, Thank you, Leander. He turned his head. For what? For saving me, not just from the fire. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. You are not alone anymore, and neither was he. She reached for his hand under the covers. Their fingers laced together in the dark, no words left, only warmth, only breath. And for the first time in 5 years, Leander Rowe slept through the night. By the third morning, Josie was rising before the sun. Leander heard her moving about the kitchen quietly, trying not to wake him. She was kneeling near the stove, coaxing a flame from the embers he'd banked the night before. He watched her from the bed, her back curved gently as she blew into the fire, hair pulled into a rough knot at the base of her neck. He sat up. You don't have to do that. She glanced over her shoulder, her voice soft. I wanted to. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed and stood. The floorboards were cold under his feet. Josie poured water from the bucket into the kettle and set it on the stove, then wiped her hands on her skirt. There were creases under her eyes that hadn't been there yesterday, but her gaze was steady. I'd like to help where I can, she said. I've never lived like this, but I'm not afraid of work. Leander rubbed a hand over his jaw. Ain't much to do except keep the place up. Water the garden, chop wood, mend what needs mending. Josie nodded. I can sew, and I'm not bad with a knife. I used to help dress game when my uncle came through. He blinked at that. You did, she smiled faintly. He didn't like hunting alone. I think he just wanted someone to listen to his stories. They didn't speak again until the kettle began to whistle. Josie poured hot water into 2 tin cups, set one in front of him at the table. She sat across from him, folding her hands around her own. I never planned to end up here, she said after a long sip. I didn't plan to find you, he replied. She looked at him, fingers tightening slightly around the cup. Do you ever go into town? Only when I need to trade. Supplies, mostly. I'd like to ride in with you next time, he raised an eyebrow. Why? I want to look for work, even just mending or cleaning. I don't want to be a burden. You're not. Her eyes searched his face. Still, he didn't argue. After a moment, he said, I'll be heading in tomorrow. The salt's low and I need new straps for the plow. Josie nodded once. I'll be ready. Later that day, while Leander was cutting fence posts along the north line, Josie cleared out the lean-to behind the barn. It had been stacked with broken tools and spider webs, but she swept it clean, laid down fresh straw, and fixed the latch on the door using wire from an old harness. When he came around, shirt damp with sweat and an axe slung over his shoulder, he found her tacking a scrap of cloth over the window frame. He leaned in the doorway. You trying to move out already? She stepped back, dust on her skirt. No. Just thought it might be good to have a place to think when I need it. He looked around the small space, then at her. That's fair. A breeze moved through the trees. The grass in the pasture swayed gently, and in the stillness, something eased in his chest. That evening, she didn't ask to share the bed again. Instead, she brought a quilt out to the porch, where the last of the light spilled across the hills. Leander joined her, bringing a second chair from inside. They sat side by side, not speaking. When the first star appeared, Josie said, My mother used to hum to me at night. She'd stop before the words came, said the words were meant for someone else. He turned his head. You miss her? I barely remember her. She died when I was 8. After that, it was just my father and his rules. Leander's voice was quiet. Mine died in the war. Ma followed the next year, fever. Josie looked down, her thumb brushing the edge of the quilt. You ever think about leaving this place? Sometimes. He paused. But I wouldn't know where to go, she nodded. Same. The silence returned, not heavy, just full. When they stood to go in, she reached for the lantern, but he caught her hand first. She looked up, and for a breath, neither of them moved. You sure about town? He asked. I need to feel useful, she said, even if it's just for a few hours. He released her hand slowly. All right. She carried the lantern back inside. He watched her go, then followed, the door closing gently behind them. The wind settled. The stars held their place. And for the first time, the quiet in the cabin didn't feel empty. The general store in Lightning Ridge sat on the south edge of town, its paint weathered thin by years of prairie sun, the porch sagging just enough to let a man feel it in his knees. When Leander tied the mare to the post, Josie was already stepping down from behind him, her boots hitting the dirt with quiet resolve. She'd taken one of his old shirts and belted it at the waist over a borrowed skirt. It didn't fit clean, but she wore it like it did. The town was small, but folks still noticed. "Let him look," she said before he could say anything. He nodded once. Inside, the store smelled of flour sacks and kerosene. A ceiling fan turned slow above them. Josie moved toward the far wall where a sign reads "Sewing and Cloth," her fingers brushing across spools of thread. Behind the counter, Elsie McKinnon squinted over her spectacles. "Rowe, you're a surprise, twice in 1 month. Who's your company?" Josie spoke before he could. "Josie Hale." "I'm looking for work." Elsie's brows lifted. "You're not from town." "No, ma'am." Elsie leaned on the counter, eyes narrowing. "You staying with Leander?" "Yes, married." Josie didn't flinch. "Not yet." That stirred a silence thick enough to feel. Leander set the salt and plow straps on the counter. "She's looking to mend or clean. Anything honest, she'll do it." Elsie studied Josie a moment longer, then gave a short nod. "Mrs. Thayer's baby just cut teeth. She's been praying for someone to help with laundry and patching." "I'll tell her to expect you." "Thank you," Josie said. "Don't thank me yet," Elsie muttered, scribbling a note. "She's a screamer." They walked out with the sun hanging low, heat bleeding off the hard, packed street. Leander handed Josie the parcel of lard and the wrapped cloth she'd chosen from the bin. "Didn't figure you'd say that," he said. "About what?" "Not yet." Josie looked out toward the distant hills. "I meant it." They didn't speak again until the horses were moving. The trail home was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. That night, Josie didn't go to the bedroll or the lean-to. She stood by the hearth long after the fire had gone low, arms folded, eyes on the embers. When Leander stepped beside her, she didn't start. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. He looked at her. "That's good." "I'm not afraid of what comes next, either. I've been told what to do my whole life." This, she gestured around the cabin, the dark outside the windows, the hush of crickets through the walls. "This is the first thing I've chosen." "You sure?" "I'm not asking you to court me, Leander. I'm not asking for anything you don't have to give. But I can't keep sleeping in corners, pretending I'm just passing through." He stepped back, gave her the space to speak. "I want to stay, not just because it's safe, not just because you pulled me from fire, but because it's you." The air between them shifted. He reached for her hand, rough palm against her knuckles. She didn't pull away. "All right," he said. "Then stay." She moved toward him slowly, like she was still waiting for the ground to change beneath her feet, but it didn't. When their lips met, it was quiet. No urgency, just the kind of kiss that said home wasn't always four walls. Sometimes it was the person who made the silence bearable. They didn't undress, didn't rush. They just stood there, holding on to what the last few days had built between them. Later, when the wind picked up and the cabin creaked in its joints, Josie lay beside him beneath the quilt. "You still sleep light?" she asked. "Not tonight," he murmured. She smiled against his shoulder, her breath warm where it settled. And for the first time in either of their lives, morning didn't feel like something to survive. Josie came back from the Thayer place with her sleeves damp and a baby's rattle tucked into her pocket. She didn't say much when she stepped inside, only hung her shawl beside the door and went to wash her hands. Leander watched from the table, one boot up on the bench, oiling his saddle straps. "Was it hard?" he asked without looking up. Josie dried her hands on a cloth. "Not hard, just loud, Mrs. Thayer says the baby only sleeps if someone hums the same tune each time. She's worn her voice out." Leander glanced up. "You sing, not loud, just under my breath." She folded the cloth and set it aside. The baby quieted, then drooled all over my sleeve. He chuckled low, the sound rough from disuse. "Guess that's a kind of thanks." She sat beside him, eyes on the leather in his hands. "You always fix your own gear." "No one else to do it," he said. "Wasn't much call for company." Josie ran a hand along the edge of the table. "I passed the chapel on the way back. Reverend Ellison was sweeping the steps. He asked if we were needing a ceremony." Leander's hands paused. He looked over at her, face unreadable. "You tell him yes. I told him we hadn't talked about it." She turned toward him. "But I'm not waiting on a train that isn't coming, not anymore." Leander set the saddle strap down. "You want to marry me?" "I want to belong somewhere I chose." She touched the wood grain of the table, her voice steady. "And I want to belong beside someone who sees me." He didn't speak for a long moment. "I buried a wife on this land," he said finally. "Thought that meant I was done with all that," Josie nodded. "You're not the only one with graves trailing behind you." His eyes stayed on hers. "You'll get no promises from me about ease or gentleness. I don't know how to be soft, Josie." "You don't have to be soft," she said. "You just have to stay." He reached across the table, took her hand in his. Calloused fingers closed over hers, sure and warm. "I'll speak to Ellison," he said. They married 3 days later in a clearing behind the cabin, beneath cottonwoods that whispered with the wind. Reverend Ellison came out with his Bible and a small bottle of creek water to bless the ground. Josie wore a linen dress she pieced together from the cloth she'd chosen in town. Leander wore his cleanest shirt and the boots he'd polished with bare grease the night before. No guests, no music. Just 2 people and the stillness of the land that had come to know them. Afterward, Josie set 3 flat stones in a row near the fence, one for her mother. One for the woman Leander had buried, one for the life they were leaving behind. That evening, the cabin felt different. Not larger, not louder, just fuller, as if the walls had taken a breath and found themselves easier to stand. Josie stood at the stove, glass jar of preserved peaches in her hand. "I found these in the old crate behind the barn." Leander leaned against the doorframe. "Been there a while, I figured." She opened the jar, spooned 2 helpings into tin bowls. "But they taste like they waited." He took the bowl she offered and sat across from her. They ate in silence, save for the sound of spoons scraping tin. Halfway through, Josie looked up. "You ever think about building onto the cabin?" Leander set his spoon down. "You want more space?" "No," she said. "I was thinking about a room with windows on each wall, just for light, maybe a place for sewing." He considered that, then nodded. "We'll see to it." That night they lay side by side, not speaking, listening to the night outside. After a while, Josie whispered, "I never knew stillness could feel like this." Leander turned toward her. "Like what?" Like staying put didn't mean giving up. His hand found hers beneath the quilt. "You haven't given up anything, Josie. You just came home." She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, her breath steady. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and inside, the quiet held not empty, not aching, but whole. The first frost came early that year. It silvered the pasture grass and stiffened the boards of the porch before dawn, leaving a hush across the land that lingered long after the sun had risen. Josie stood wrapped in a wool shawl near the paddock, watching the mare nuzzle at the ice-rimmed trough. Leander was by the smokehouse, splitting kindling with slow, even strikes. "Fence is leaning east of the creek," she said as he came toward her, hands red from the cold. "I noticed it when I checked the line." He nodded once. "We'll shore it up before the ground hardens." She looked toward the rise that shielded the homestead from the wind. "When winter settles in, will we be snowed in?" "Sometimes," he said. "Last February, I couldn't get past the ridge for near a week. Had to burn the ladder when the stove ran low." Josie raised an eyebrow. "You plan on burning furniture this year too?" "No need," he said. "I've got something worth keeping the place warm for now." She turned to him, her breath visible between them. "I'll keep the stove lit." "You keep the fences standing." He touched her cheek with the back of his hand, the gesture quiet, certain. "That's a fair trade." By mid-morning, they were working side by side along the creek bend. Josie held the post steady while Leander drove it in with the sledge. The rhythm came easy between them. No instructions, no corrections. Just the sound of wood meeting earth and the occasional caw of a crow overhead. When the last post stood upright, Leander wiped his brow with his sleeve. "You always this stubborn about helping?" Josie glanced at her hands, dirt beneath her nails. "If I weren't stubborn, I wouldn't be here." He looked at her a moment, something thoughtful behind his eyes. "You ever miss what you left?" She considered that. "I miss the sound of a piano. I miss the feel of a book in my lap when it's storming out, but I don't miss being owned." He sat down on a flat rock, resting the mallet across his knees. "I've got a hymnal somewhere, from before. It's missing the cover, but the pages are still good." She crouched beside him. "You kept it?" "Didn't know why at the time, just couldn't bring myself to throw it in the fire." I could teach you the notes, she said. If you want. He looked down at the frost-softened grass. I'd like that. That night, Josie brought the hymnal down from the shelf above the stovepipe. She set it on the table, ran her fingers across the worn pages. Leander sat across from her, elbows on the table, listening as she traced the melody of Come Thou Fount with her voice low and steady. When she finished, he said nothing for a moment. Then, keep going. She sang two more before her voice gave out. He reached for her hand and held it there against the table, the hymnal between them. By December, the light had shortened. Snow came in steady layers, not deep but constant. The lean-to Josie had once cleaned was now a pantry, lined with shelves Leander built from scrap pine. She filled them with jars of corn relish, dried root vegetables, and lard sealed with beeswax. One afternoon, while she was threading a new hem on his winter coat, she asked, "What did you think would become of you?" Leander looked up from sharpening the hatchet. "Didn't think much past spring most years. And now, I think about whether these walls will hold through March. I think about whether you'll want chickens come April." She set the coat aside. "I do." "Then I'll build the coop," he said simply. When the first snowfall came heavy enough to bury the fence rails, they stayed in for 3 days. Josie made porridge from oats and molasses. Leander fashioned a cradle from a cedar board he'd been saving since before the thaw. She found it by the hearth one morning, sanded smooth, lined with a patchwork quilt she hadn't seen since her first week there. She sat beside it, hands folded in her lap. "You saw before I did," he crouched beside her. "I didn't dare ask. I was waiting to be sure," she said, and her voice didn't tremble. "But I think I've known since the second frost." He placed his hand over hers. "You're not alone in it, I know." The cradle stayed by the hearth, quiet and waiting. Winter held fast until late March. Then the melt began slow and steady, filling the creek and softening the ground beneath the willows. Josie leaned against the porch rail, one hand resting low on her belly, watching Leander split wood in shirt sleeves again. "You think the coop ought to go near the garden?" he asked. "No," she said. "Farther out. I want the sound of them to mean something's growing." He tipped his head, considering. "We'll stake it tomorrow." That night, Leander rubbed linseed into the cradle rails while Josie mended the knees of his trousers. The lamp burned low, casting amber light across the cabin walls. She looked up at him. "Will you still love me when I'm tired and full of worry?" "I'll love you when you're neither," he said. "And when you're both," she smiled, slow and sure, "then I'm yours. You always were." The baby came in early June as the first of the wildflowers opened in the meadow. A girl with her mother's chin and a cry that filled the cabin like a hymn. Leander caught her in his hands, and Josie, sweat on her brow, leaned back against him while the world outside turned soft and green again. They named her Marion, after the woman who once hummed lullabies but never sang the words. Josie stitched her a bonnet from the cloth she'd worn the day she arrived. That summer, the coop filled with hens. The garden grew wild and generous. The cradle rocked slow in the evenings as Josie sang, her voice no longer quiet. And Leander, once a man who thought the world had ended in a fire, learned that love could arrive not sudden, but steady like a fence line built one post at a time, strong enough to last through any winter. They grew old together on that land, never needing more than what they could hold in 2 hands in a quiet room, and they never once slept apart again.